At my husband's funeral, his daughter-in-law threw me out of my own house. Stop crying. Pack your bags and get out now. Those were the words Serafina hissed at me while mourners were still leaving Mateo's graveside, not a week later, not even that evening, but right there at the reception while I was still wearing black and trembling with grief. She called me a worthless burden in front of everyone. She handed me an eviction notice like I was a squatter. She told me I had 30 days to move into some cheap senior facility she'd already picked out because, and I quote, "You can't afford to live in a house this big anymore." The house I built in 1987, with my own money, in my own name. But here's what Serafina didn't know. She didn't know that the $420,000 house she was kicking me out of. I own it, fully, no mortgage, never has been. She didn't know that the $150,000 life insurance policy she was already planning to spend. It goes to my family trust, not to her, not to my son, to me. She didn't know that the dependent widow she was humiliating in front of her real estate colleagues was the same woman who'd been quietly funding her husband's entire lifestyle for years. Serafina saw a grieving old woman in an outdated cardigan. She assumed I was helpless, penniless, easy to erase. She was wrong. And instead of correcting her right there at the funeral, instead of pulling out documents or calling my lawyer or making a scene, I just walked away. I let her think she'd won. I let her move forward with her cruel little plans. Because sometimes, silence is the most powerful response of all. Sometimes, you let people dig their own graves. Before we continue with this story, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because what Serafina discovered days later changed everything. Also, drop a comment and let me know, what time is it where you're watching from, and where in the world are you right now? I love connecting with you all. At my husband's funeral, his daughter-in-law threw me out of my own house. Stop crying. Pack your bags and get out now. Those were the words Serafina hissed at me while mourners were still leaving Mateo's graveside, not a week later, not even that evening, but right there at the reception while I was still wearing black and trembling with grief. She called me a worthless burden in front of everyone. She handed me an eviction notice like I was a squatter. She told me I had 30 days to move into some cheap senior facility she'd already picked out because, and I quote, "You can't afford to live in a house this big anymore." The house I built in 1987, with my own money, in my own name. But here's what Serafina didn't know. She didn't know that the $420,000 house she was kicking me out of. I own it, fully, no mortgage, never has been. She didn't know that the $150,000 life insurance policy she was already planning to spend. It goes to my family trust, not to her, not to my son, to me. She didn't know that the dependent widow she was humiliating in front of her real estate colleagues was the same woman who'd been quietly funding her husband's entire lifestyle for years. Serafina saw a grieving old woman in an outdated cardigan. She assumed I was helpless, penniless, easy to erase. She was wrong. And instead of correcting her right there at the funeral, instead of pulling out documents or calling my lawyer or making a scene, I just walked away. I let her think she'd won. I let her move forward with her cruel little plans. Because sometimes, silence is the most powerful response of all. Sometimes, you let people dig their own graves. Before we continue with this story, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because what Serafina discovered days later changed everything. Also, drop a comment and let me know, what time is it where you're watching from, and where in the world are you right now? I love connecting with you all. Chapter 1. Mateo died on a Tuesday morning in early autumn. I was holding his hand when his breathing stopped, and for a moment, the world went completely silent. 52 years of marriage ended in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and artificial flowers. Serafina arrived 20 minutes later, not to comfort me, not to grieve with me, but to take control. She swept into that room like she owned it, phone already pressed to her ear, making calls about funeral arrangements before I'd even stood up from Mateo's bedside. She spoke in that sharp, efficient tone she used with clients at her real estate firm, listing tasks, delegating responsibilities, deciding everything without once asking what I wanted. "I've contacted Riverside Funeral Home," she announced, scrolling through her phone. "They have availability for Saturday. I'll handle the service program. Ramiro's too emotional to deal with this right now, and obviously you're in no state to make decisions." Obviously. That word hung in the air like an insult. She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time since entering, and I saw it in her eyes, pity mixed with something sharper, dismissal. She saw a grieving widow in a worn cardigan. She saw someone broken, helpless, finished. What she didn't see was calculation. The days between Mateo's death and his funeral blurred together. Serafina organized everything with ruthless efficiency. She chose the casket, selected the flowers, wrote the obituary without showing me a draft. She invited people I'd never met, colleagues from Ramiro's firm, clients from her real estate business, and somehow forgot to include Mateo's oldest friends from the neighborhood. She commandeered my kitchen, filling it with catering menus and guest lists spread across the table where Mateo and I had eaten breakfast every morning for 4 decades. When I tried to move them to look at the arrangements, she physically blocked me. "Elora, please. You'll just get overwhelmed. Let me handle this." My own kitchen, my own husband's funeral, and I was being managed like an inconvenience. The funeral itself was a performance. Serafina stood near the front, greeting mourners like a hostess at a networking event, accepting condolences meant for me. She'd chosen a venue I'd never seen before, some modern event space downtown instead of the small church where Mateo and I were married. I sat in the front row, numb, while she orchestrated everything from the eulogy schedule to the timing of the reception. Ramiro stood beside her, grief-stricken and silent, letting his wife speak for both of them. My son had always been soft-hearted, easily led, especially by Serafina. The reception was held at my house, at least, that's what I still called it. Serafina had already started referring to it as the family property in conversations with the caterers. I stood in my own living room, surrounded by strangers offering hollow condolences, watching Serafina move through the space like she was hosting an open house. She pointed out architectural features to her real estate colleagues. She discussed property values. She actually used the phrase, "good bones," while standing 3 feet from Mateo's framed photograph. Then, as the last guests were leaving, she found me in the kitchen. "Elora, we need to talk." She closed the door behind her, blocking the exit. "I know this is hard, but we have to be practical now." She pulled a folded document from her purse and placed it on the counter between us. Even upside down, I could see the header, "Notice to vacate." "This house is too much for you now," Serafina said, her voice taking on that syrupy tone people use when they're about to do something cruel and want to pretend it's kindness. "You can't possibly maintain a property this size on your own. I've already looked into several senior living facilities in the area. There's one on Maple Street that's very affordable, clean, safe." I stared at the document, 30 days notice, signed by her, as if she had any authority to sign anything related to my property. "Everything transitions to us now," she continued. "The house, the insurance, all of it. Mateo would have wanted you taken care of, and we will, but you need to be realistic about your situation. You're alone now. You have no income, no assets of your own." She actually reached out and patted my hand, like I was a confused child. "It's time to let go, Elora. Stop crying. Pack your bags. The family needs to move forward." I looked at her, really looked at her, and said nothing, not a single word. I simply picked up the notice, folded it carefully, and walked out of my own kitchen while she was still talking. What she didn't see was calculation. What she couldn't imagine was that silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. Serafina returned the next morning with boxes. Not moving boxes for her own belongings, boxes for mine, for ours, for everything Matteo and I had built together over half a century. She didn't knock. She had a key now, one she'd taken from Matteo's keyring at the hospital, and she used it like the house was already hers. I heard the front door open at 8:15, followed by the sound of her heels clicking across the hardwood floors Matteo and I had refinished together in 1993. "Elora," she called out, her voice echoing through the house. "I brought some supplies. We should start packing up Matteo's things. And, honestly, some of your decorations too. They're very dated." I found her in the living room, already removing our wedding photo from the mantel. She held it at arm's length, examining it like a realtor assessing an outdated fixture, then placed it face down in a cardboard box labeled personal items. "Elora. What are you doing?" My voice came out quieter than I intended. "Clearing the space," she said brightly, as if this were perfectly reasonable. "Potential buyers need to envision themselves here, and all this clutter makes that difficult. These photos, the old furniture, that awful floral wallpaper in the dining room, it all has to go." Potential buyers. She was already planning to sell it, the house I built, the house where Matteo proposed to me in an unfinished living room with exposed studs and a concrete floor, the house where we raised Ramiro, where we celebrated every Christmas, every birthday, every ordinary Tuesday evening for 40 years. Over the next week, Serafina systematically erased us. She boxed up the framed photographs that lined the hallway, Matteo and me at Niagara Falls, Ramiro's high school graduation, our 30th anniversary dinner. She took down the cross-stitch samplers I'd made, the ones with Bible verses that had hung in the kitchen since 1989. She removed Matteo's reading glasses from the side table where he'd left them, his bookmarks still holding his place in a Tom Clancy novel he'd never finish. She called it staging. I called it erasure. "You're treating this like a foreclosure cleanup," I said, watching her wrap our anniversary clock in newspaper. "I'm treating it like a business decision," she corrected. "Which is what this is, Elora. Emotional attachment doesn't pay property taxes." As if I hadn't been paying those taxes since 1987. She brought her real estate binder one afternoon and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Matteo carved Ramiro's height marks into the leg when he was 7, and made a list. She actually made a list, right in front of me, itemizing everything she thought she was inheriting. I saw it when she went to the bathroom. She'd left it open on the table. Asset inventory, Varela Estate was written across the top in her sharp handwriting. House, estimated value $420,000. Life insurance payout, $150,000. Total liquid assets, $570,000. She'd drawn a little star next to the total and written, confirmed, as if she'd already verified these numbers with someone, as if they were already hers. Below that, she'd written a timeline. Week 1, clear personal items. Week 2, minor repairs and staging. Week 3, list property. Week 4, Elora's move-out date. My move-out date, from my own house. The cruelty wasn't just in the eviction itself, it was in the details. The cheap senior facility she'd picked out, Maple Gardens, was 40 minutes away from everything I knew. No sidewalks, no bus line, completely isolated. I'd looked it up online. The place had 1-star reviews and photos that showed cramped rooms with fluorescent lighting and plastic furniture. "It's actually quite nice," Serafina had said when she showed me the brochure. "And at $1,200 a month, it's very affordable on a fixed income. They have bingo on Thursdays." As if bingo could replace 52 years of marriage, as if $1,200 a month was generous when she thought she was inheriting $570,000. She'd even picked out which furniture I'd be allowed to take: a single bed, one small dresser, a reading chair. Everything else would be sold with the house or donated. "You won't have room for much," she explained, measuring my bedroom with a contractor's tape measure she'd brought. Senior apartments are designed for minimal belongings. It's actually quite freeing, don't you think? A fresh start. A fresh start, that's what she called it when she boxed up the baby blanket I'd knitted for Ramiro, still stored in the hall closet. A fresh start when she removed Mateo's jacket from the hook by the door, the one that still smelled like his cologne. I watched her work, cataloging everything she was taking from me, the house, the insurance money, my history, my dignity. She thought she was preparing an estate sale. What she didn't know was that she was compiling evidence for her own trial. Serafina came back on Thursday with a spreadsheet. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table, Mateo's chair, the one with the worn armrest where he'd rested his coffee every morning, and opened her laptop like she was conducting a business audit. "We need to talk about finances," she said, her fingers already flying across the keyboard. "I've been going through Mateo's bank statements, and I need you to help me understand where all his money was going." I'd been folding Mateo's shirts, the ones Serafina had thrown in a donation box. I'd taken them out after she left, pressed them, folded them properly. My hands stilled on the fabric. "His money?" I asked quietly. "Yes, his salary, his accounts. There are consistent payments I can't account for, large ones." She turned the laptop toward me. "See? Monthly transfers, thousands of dollars. Were you borrowing from him? Did he have to cover your expenses?" The shirt in my hands was Mateo's favorite, blue plaid. He'd worn it the day Ramiro was born, pacing the hospital waiting room for 14 hours. There was still a faint stain on the collar from the celebratory champagne. "Serafina," I said slowly, "what expenses do you think Mateo was covering for me?" "Well, obviously living expenses, this house, utilities, food, medical bills. You didn't work, so he must have been supporting you entirely." I set the shirt down carefully. "I didn't work? Not since Ramiro was born, right? You were a homemaker. Which is fine, Alora, no judgment. But that means Mateo was the breadwinner. He paid for everything." Something cracked open inside my chest, not anger yet, but something deeper, the kind of hurt that comes from being invisible for so long that people forget you were ever there at all. "Let me ask you something," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "This house, who do you think paid for it?" "Mateo, obviously. He was the one with the career, the income. Before Mateo and I married, what did I do for a living?" Serafina blinked. I don't know. Does it matter? I was a CPA. I worked for Morrison and Associates for 15 years. I did tax preparation for small businesses and estate planning for high net worth clients. Okay, but that was before. And when did we buy this house, Serafina? She glanced at her spreadsheet, confused by the question. "I don't know, the 80s? 1987, March 14th. I was 34 years old." I picked up the blue shirt again, holding it against my chest like armor. "We bought this land for $18,000. Mateo and I drew up the plans together at this very table. We worked with a contractor named Samuel Chen. The total build cost was $67,000. Right, so Mateo paid. I paid." My voice cracked on the words. "In cash. From my savings. Money I'd earned and invested before I ever met your husband's father." The room went silent except for the hum of Serafina's laptop. "That's impossible," she said finally. "You're confused. Maybe grief is affecting your memory, but... Do you know what the property taxes are on this house, Serafina? What does that have to do with? Answer the question." She stared at me, her jaw tight. "No, I don't know. $6,200 a year. Do you know who's paid them every year since 1987? Every January, without fail? Serafina's fingers had stopped moving on her keyboard. Who pays the homeowner's insurance? I continued, my voice gaining strength. Who paid for the new roof in 2003? The foundation repair in 2011? The HVAC replacement last summer? Mateo had to have. Show me. Show me one check, one bank transfer, one receipt with Mateo's name on it for this house. Her face was flushing now, red creeping up her neck. You're playing word games. Obviously there's documentation. Then show it to me. I don't have to prove anything to you. She slammed her laptop shut. This is exactly why we need lawyers involved. You're clearly confused about the financial arrangements in your marriage, and that's sad, Alora, it really is. But confusion doesn't change reality. You're right, I said quietly. It doesn't. Good. Then you'll agree we need to see the deed, the actual property deed. I'm sure once we look at the documentation, everything will be clear. She was standing now, looming over me, her hand outstretched like she expected me to simply walk to a drawer and hand over the proof of my own erasure. I stood too, still holding Mateo's shirt. No. Excuse me? No. You will not see the deed. Not today. Not from me. Alora, I'm trying to be patient here, but you're making this very difficult. If you have nothing to hide. I have everything to protect, I said, and my voice finally broke. Everything you're trying to take. Everything you've already decided belongs to you. My home, my life, my history with a man I loved for 52 years. Serafina's expression shifted. For just a moment, I saw something that might have been doubt. This conversation is over, I continued. If you want to see documentation, you can request it through your attorney. And I'll respond through mine. You don't have an attorney. Yes, I said, folding Mateo's shirt one final time. I do. She left without another word, but I heard her in the hallway, making a phone call before she'd even reached her car. I sat back down in my chair, not Mateo's, but mine, the one I'd sat in for 40 years, and let myself cry. Not because I was afraid. Because I was tired of being treated like I'd never existed at all. The basement stairs creaked the same way they had for 38 years. I descended slowly, my hand trailing along the wooden railing Mateo had sanded smooth in 1989 after Ramiro got a splinter racing down these steps. Each creak was familiar, a sound map of my own home. Third step from the top, loud groan. Seventh step, soft whisper. Bottom step, silent. The basement was my sanctuary. Always had been. While Serafina was upstairs erasing our living room, our kitchen, our bedroom, she'd barely glanced down here. Too dark, probably, too unfinished, not worth staging for potential buyers. The concrete floor, the exposed beams, the single bulb hanging from a wire, none of it fit her vision of market-ready real estate. Which meant she'd never seen what I kept down here. The filing cabinet stood against the far wall, exactly where Mateo had placed it for me in 1987. For drawers, hunter green metal, slightly dented on the bottom left corner from where we'd bumped it coming down the stairs. He'd wanted to buy me something prettier, something modern. But I'd chosen this one deliberately, industrial, fireproof, built to last. Why do you need something so heavy? He'd asked, laughing as we maneuvered it into position. Because paper trails tell stories, I'd told him. And stories protect you when memories fail or people lie. He'd kissed my forehead and called me his practical girl. I stood in front of that cabinet now, my hand resting on the cool metal. Upstairs, Serafina was probably still on the phone with her attorney, building her case for why this house should be hers. Let her build. Let her plan. I pulled open the second drawer. Everything was exactly where it should be, alphabetized, color-coded, cross-referenced. 40 years of meticulous record-keeping organized into folders with labels written in my own careful handwriting. Auto insurance. Birth certificates. Education, Ramiro. Healthcare. Homeowners insurance. And there, between property tax and retirement accounts, real estate. My hands shook as I pulled the folder free. It was thicker than most, filled with documents I'd reviewed countless times over the decades but hadn't needed to prove to anyone, because no one had ever questioned that this was my home. Until now. I opened the folder carefully. The papers inside were originals, stored in sheet protectors to prevent deterioration. The first document was the land purchase agreement from March 1987. My signature, Alora Varela, clear and confident at the bottom. Mateo's signature beside it as spouse, but not as owner. Never as owner. I traced my finger over my maiden name, the woman I'd been before marriage, before motherhood, before I became invisible. Beneath that was the building permit, then the contractor's invoices, each one marked paid in full with my signature and the date. The final inspection certificate from October 1987, declaring the structure sound and complete. And finally, the deed. Grant deed, the header read in bold official typeface. Property location, 847 Sycamore Avenue. My eyes moved to the buyer information section. Grantee, Alora Sofia Varela. Not Alora and Mateo Varela. Not Mr. and Mrs. Mateo Varela. Just me, sole owner, single name, my name. I'd been 34 years old, standing in the county recorder's office with a cashier's check for $67,000. The clerk had asked me twice if I was sure I wanted the deed in my name only. My money, my name, I'd said. Mateo had never questioned it, never asked to be added. He'd understood that this house was my security, my foundation, the proof that I was more than just someone's wife. I pulled the deed from its protective sleeve and held it up to the light. The paper had yellowed slightly, but the ink was still bold. Official stamps and signatures covered the bottom half. County seal embossed in the corner. Evidence. Irrefutable. I returned the deed to the folder but kept it out. There was one more folder I needed. Top drawer this time. Filed under T. Trust documents, private. This folder was slimmer but infinitely more powerful. I'd established the Alora and Mateo Family Trust in 1995, 10 years after Ramiro's birth, when my CPA mind recognized we needed estate planning, protection, structure. Control. The trust documents confirmed everything. The house, my house, was titled in my name but listed as an asset of the trust. I was the trustee, the sole decision-maker. Mateo had been a co-trustee until his death, but the power had always resided with me. Ramiro was listed as a beneficiary, not an owner, not an inheritor, but a beneficiary, which meant he received support from the trust during our lifetime but had no claim to its assets while I lived. Serafina wasn't listed at all. She'd married into the family, but she'd never been written into its foundation. I sat down on the cold concrete floor, folders spread around me like evidence at a crime scene. 40 years of careful planning, 40 years of documentation, every receipt, every tax payment, every insurance premium. All of it proving the same simple truth: this house was mine. I thought about Mateo then, really thought about him for the first time since Serafina's cruelty had turned my grief into something harder. He'd known. He'd always known this house was mine, these decisions were mine, this life we'd built had been founded on my strength as much as his. "I'm sorry," I whispered to the empty basement, to his memory, to the ghost of us working together to build something that would last. "I'm sorry she's trying to erase you. Erase us." But grief would have to wait. I gathered the folders, turned off the light, and climbed the stairs. I had a war to prepare for. I spread the trust documents across my kitchen table that night, the same table where Serafina had made her asset inventory list, The same table where she'd calculated her inheritance, where she'd drawn that little star next to $570,000 and written, confirmed. She'd confirmed nothing. The Alora and Mateo Family Trust. Established April 15, 1995. I remembered the date because it was tax day, and I'd just finished preparing returns for 43 clients. Mateo had made me coffee while I filled out the trust paperwork at 2 in the morning, both of us exhausted but determined to protect what we'd built. "Why are you naming it after both of us when it's your money?" he'd asked, reading over my shoulder. "Because it's our family," I'd said. "Even if the assets are mine." He'd kissed the top of my head and signed where I told him to. The trust documents told a story Serafina had never bothered to read, a story about a woman who'd worked, saved, invested, and built a safety net so strong it had supported 3 generations without anyone noticing the hand holding it all together. Initial funding, $127,000. My inheritance from my parents, combined with 15 years of CPA savings, invested carefully in municipal bonds and index funds. Current balance as of Mateo's death, $853,247. 58 years of compound interest, 58 years of careful management, 58 years of making money grow silently in the background while everyone assumed Mateo was supporting me. The beneficiary section made my hands shake. Primary beneficiary during lifetime of trustee, Ramiro Jose Varela. My son, my gentle, soft-hearted boy who'd never been good with money, who'd gone to medical school on loans he couldn't afford, who'd bought a house with Serafina that stretched their budget to breaking. What Serafina didn't know, what Ramiro had been too ashamed to tell her, was that every month for the past 12 years, the trust had sent him $3,000. Automatic transfer. Covering the gap between his residence salary and their mortgage payment. Then covering the gap between his attending physician's salary and Serafina's spending habits. $3,000 every single month, for 12 years. $432,000. That's how much of Serafina's lifestyle I'd been funding. The nice car she drove, the designer handbags, the girls' trips to wine country she posted on social media. All of it subsidized by the woman she was trying to throw into a $1,200 a month senior facility. I'd never told Mateo the exact amount. He knew about the trust, knew I helped Ramiro, but I'd kept the details vague. Just helping them get established, I'd said. Mateo had worried I was being taken advantage of. Maybe he'd been right. But the most important page was the last one, the one that made Serafina's asset inventory list completely, devastatingly wrong. Life insurance policy designation. Policy number, LF 8847293V, Principal, Mateo Esteban Varela. Benefit amount, $150,000. Beneficiary, the Alora and Mateo Family Trust. Not Serafina. Not Ramiro. The trust. Which meant the money came to me, as trustee, under my sole control. Serafina had been planning to spend $150,000 that was never hers to begin with. She'd probably already allocated it in that spreadsheet of hers, maybe earmarked it for renovations before selling the house, maybe for a new car, maybe just for the satisfaction of having it. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. The life insurance payment had already been processed, deposited 3 days ago into the trust account while Serafina was upstairs boxing up my photographs. Available balance, $1,003,247. Over $1 million, money I'd earned, saved, invested, and protected. Money that had been quietly keeping this family afloat while Serafina spent and Ramiro struggled and everyone assumed I was the dependent one. I thought about calling Ramiro then, telling him what his wife was doing. But I already knew what would happen. He'd be caught in the middle, torn between his mother and his wife. He'd try to mediate, to smooth things over, to make everyone happy, just like he'd always done. And Serafina would twist it. She'd make him choose. Maybe she'd even convince him I was lying, confused, suffering from grief-induced delusions. No. This conversation couldn't happen through Ramiro. It had to happen directly, publicly, with witnesses who couldn't be manipulated or convinced to look the other way. I gathered the trust documents back into their folder, the deed, the tax records showing 38 years of payments in my name, the bank statements showing the monthly transfers to Ramiro, the life insurance beneficiary designation. Every piece of paper a nail in the coffin of Serafina's assumptions. My phone buzzed. A text from Ramiro. Mom, Serafina said you were difficult today about the house paperwork. Please just cooperate. This is hard enough without you making it harder. I love you. I stared at that message for a long time. My son, asking me to cooperate with my own erasure, asking me to make it easier for his wife to steal everything I'd built. He didn't know. That's what I told myself. He didn't know what Serafina was really doing, what she was really saying to me when he wasn't there. But part of me wondered if not knowing was a choice he'd made. I didn't respond to his text. Instead, I took a photograph of the trust balance statement, $1,003,247. I saved it to a folder on my phone labeled Evidence. Then I opened my contacts and scrolled to a name I hadn't called in months. Attorney Zoya Petrova. Estate planning specialist. The lawyer who'd helped me establish the trust 29 years ago. I typed out a message, I need to see you tomorrow. It's urgent. Someone is trying to take my house. Her response came within minutes, 9 a.m. My office. Bring everything. I would. But not yet. Not tomorrow. First, I needed to let Serafina finish digging her own grave. I needed to let her show exactly who she was, what she was capable of, how far she'd go. Because the deeper she dug, the harder she'd fall. And I was going to make sure everyone was watching when it happened. They arrived on Saturday morning. 4 of them. Serafina led the way, of course, her heels clicking across my front porch like she owned it. Behind her came 3 women in matching blazers and perfectly styled hair, carrying clipboards and digital tablets, their voices bright and professional. I was in the kitchen making tea when I heard the key in the lock. My key. My lock. My door. Elora? Serafina called out, not waiting for an answer before bringing her entourage inside. I have some colleagues here to do a property assessment. We'll try not to disturb you. I appeared in the doorway, teacup in hand, and watched 4 strangers fan out across my living room like they were touring a foreclosure. This is Chelsea, Monica, and Jenna, Serafina said, gesturing vaguely at the 3 women. Top agents at Premier Realty. I wanted their professional opinion on listing strategy. Chelsea was already measuring the windows. Monica was photographing the fireplace. Jenna was making notes on her tablet, her face carefully neutral. The bones are good, Chelsea announced, running her hand along the wall. But everything else is, well, it's very 1980s, isn't it? Exactly what I said, Serafina agreed. We're looking at a complete cosmetic overhaul before we can list competitively. New paint, updated fixtures, maybe knock out this wall to open up the space. She pointed at the wall between the living room and dining room, the wall Mateo and I had specifically designed to create separate spaces for family dinners, the wall where Ramiro's height measurements were still penciled in on the other side, hidden behind a bookshelf. That wallpaper has to go, Monica said, photographing the dining room. And these curtains. God, is this floral print? What year is this from? 1992, I said quietly. I made them myself. The 3 women looked at me like I just confirmed something unfortunate. Well, they're very, homey, Jenna offered diplomatically. Outdated, Chelsea corrected. Buyers today want modern, clean lines, neutral palettes. They moved through the house like a demolition crew, cataloging everything I'd chosen, everything I'd made, everything I'd loved. The kitchen cabinets I'd painted by hand, too dark. The bathroom tile I'd carefully selected, wrong era. The bedroom wallpaper Mateo and I had hung together on our 10th anniversary, dated. 40 years of my life reduced to a list of cosmetic problems. Serafina was in her element, leading the tour, pointing out issues, with the authority of someone who'd lived here for years instead of someone who'd visited maybe twice a month for dinner. The real challenge, she said, gathering her colleagues in the living room, is that Elora can't afford to maintain a house this size anymore. The utilities alone are probably devastating on a fixed income. I was standing in the kitchen doorway. She knew I could hear her. She wanted me to hear her. It's actually quite sad, Serafina continued, lowering her voice just enough to sound concerned rather than cruel. She's been dependent on my husband, on Mateo, for so long that she has no concept of how expensive homeownership really is. Property taxes, insurance, maintenance. It's overwhelming for someone in her position. Chelsea nodded sympathetically. That's so common with widows. They're suddenly faced with financial realities they've never had to deal with. Exactly, Serafina said. Which is why we need to act quickly. Get the house listed before things deteriorate further. She's already letting things slide. What things? I asked. The four women turned to look at me. I was still holding my teacup, steam rising from the Earl Grey I'd been too tense to drink. I'm sorry, Serafina said. What things am I letting slide? Well, the general upkeep, the yard work, I mowed the lawn on Thursday. I cleaned the gutters last month. I had the HVAC serviced in September. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. What, specifically, am I letting slide? Serafina's smile tightened. Elora, we're just trying to help you. There's no shame in admitting this is too much for you. This house has never been too much for me. Because Mateo was helping you, she said, her voice taking on that patient, explaining to a child tone. And now that he's gone, you need to be realistic about your capabilities. Monica was looking uncomfortable now. Jenna had stopped taking notes. Ladies, Serafina said, turning back to her colleagues, the bottom line is we're looking at a property that could sell for $420,000 with the right staging, maybe more. But we need to move fast before Elora's situation complicates things further. Her situation? Chelsea asked. Being a burden, Serafina said simply. On the family. On the property. On everyone trying to help her move forward. The word hung in the air like poison. Burden. The same word she'd used at the funeral. The same word she'd probably been using in private conversations about me for years. I'm standing right here, I said, and my voice finally cracked. I'm standing in my own kitchen, listening to you call me a burden in my own home. Elora. This house is not too much for me. It has never been too much for me. And before you list it, before you plan your renovations and your staging and your open houses, you might want to check who actually owns it. Serafina's expression shifted, just slightly, a flicker of uncertainty. We know who owns it, she said carefully. The family estate. Check the deed, I said. Have your colleagues here pull up the county records. Check who's been paying the property taxes for 38 years. Check whose name is on the title. I don't need to check anything, Serafina snapped. I've already reviewed the documentation with my attorney. Then your attorney is incompetent. The room went silent. Monica whispered something to Jenna. Chelsea was looking between Serafina and me like she'd walked into a family dispute she hadn't signed up for. You know what? Serafina said, her voice ice-cold now. We're done here. Ladies, let's finish this assessment outside. They fled, all four of them. I watched through the window as they huddled on the driveway, Serafina gesturing angrily while her colleagues nodded and took notes and probably wondered what kind of mess they'd just witnessed. I set my teacup down on the counter. My hands were still shaking. But I'd planted the seed. And now I just had to wait for it to grow. Attorney Zoya Petrova's office smelled like leather and old books. I'd been coming here for 29 years, first to establish the trust, then for annual reviews, and finally for Mateo's estate planning. The shelves were lined with legal volumes and framed certifications. Everything in its place. Everything documented. She looked older now. Gray had overtaken the brown in her hair, and reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck. But her eyes were still sharp, still capable of seeing through nonsense to truth. I laid the folders on her desk, 3 of them, real estate, trust documents, life insurance. "Tell me everything," she said. So I did. I told her about the funeral, about Serafina's eviction notice handed to me while I was still grieving. About the boxes, the erasure, the systematic dismantling of 40 years of memories. About the asset inventory list with the little star and the word, confirmed. About the spreadsheet demanding an accounting of Mateo's expenses for me. About being called a burden in front of strangers in my own home. Zoya didn't interrupt. She opened each folder methodically, reading every document with the careful attention of someone who understood that paper trails were weapons when wielded correctly. "She brought real estate agents to your house?" Zoya asked finally. 3 of them. To assess the property for listing. She told them I couldn't afford to maintain it. That I was dependent on Mateo. That I was letting things slide. While standing in the house you built with your own money. Yes. Zoya removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. "Elora, why did you wait? You could have stopped this the day she handed you that eviction notice. 1 phone call to me, and I would have sent her a cease and desist immediately." "I know. You could have shown her the deed the moment she questioned ownership. You could have corrected her assumptions about the trust, about the insurance, about everything." "I know. So why didn't you?" I looked at my hands, folded in my lap, the same hands that had built this house, that had managed a family trust for 3 decades, that had held Mateo's hand while he died and then been expected to simply disappear. "Because I needed to see how far she'd go," I said quietly. "I needed to know if she'd stop on her own. If somewhere in all of this, she'd pause and think maybe she should verify her assumptions before throwing an elderly widow out of her home. And she didn't pause. She accelerated. Every day, she took more, said worse things, treated me like I was already erased." Zoya leaned back in her chair. "You let her hang herself?" "Yes. That's dangerous, Elora, legally speaking. The longer you wait, the more she can argue you accepted her authority, that your silence was consent. Which is why I'm here now, before the 30 days are up, before she's actually done anything legally actionable." Zoya smiled slightly. "You've been thinking about this." "I used to be a CPA. I've been thinking about nothing else." She pulled out a legal pad and began writing. "All right. Let's talk strategy. First, the life insurance. You said it's already been deposited into the trust account 3 days ago. She has no idea. Good. That's clean. She has no claim on it, never did, and now it's beyond her reach." Zoya made a note. "Second, the house. We need to establish your ownership definitively and publicly. I'll prepare a formal notice stating that you are the sole owner and that any attempt to sell, renovate, or otherwise interfere with the property will result in legal action. I want to serve it to her personally. That's not standard procedure. I want her colleagues to see it. The same 3 women who toured my house. Who listened to her call me a burden. Who catalogued my life's work as outdated." Zoya's pen paused on the paper. You want witnesses. I want accountability. Elora, this isn't about revenge, is it? No, I said, and I meant it. It's about education. Serafina has spent 12 years married to my son, benefiting from my financial support, and she never once wondered where the money was coming from. She assumed. She made herself comfortable in assumptions that erased me completely. And now you want to unerase yourself. I want her to understand that silence doesn't mean absence, that quiet doesn't mean weak, that just because someone doesn't demand credit doesn't mean they deserve no respect. Zoya studied me for a long moment. This is going to be painful for Ramiro. He'll be caught in the middle. He's already in the middle. He's been letting his wife treat his mother like garbage for weeks. Maybe he needs to see who his wife really is. Or maybe he already knows and he's chosen to look away. The truth of that statement hit me like a physical blow. I thought of Ramiro's text, please just cooperate. This is hard enough without you making it harder. Not, what is Serafina doing to you? Not, let me help you, Mom. Just cooperate. Make it easier. Don't make waves. Then he needs to learn to look directly, I said. Zoya nodded and continued writing. Here's what I propose. We serve Serafina with 3 documents simultaneously. 1. Notification of your sole ownership with supporting documentation. 2. A cease and desist regarding any claims on your property. 3. A formal eviction notice giving her 30 days to vacate any claim or interest in your affairs. Can we do that at her office? It's highly unusual. Can we legally do it? Yes. It's unorthodox, but yes. Service can be performed at her place of business. Then that's where we do it. Premier Realty. During business hours. With her colleagues present. Elora, that's public humiliation. No, I said, my voice firm. Public humiliation is what Serafina did to me, at my husband's funeral, in my own home, in front of strangers she brought to judge my life. This is public education. Zoya set down her pen. All right. I'll prepare the documents. But I'm coming with you. This needs to be done correctly, professionally, and with legal witness to every word spoken. When? I can have everything ready by Monday. That gives Serafina the weekend to stew on whatever doubts you planted yesterday. I thought about Serafina's face when I told her to check the deed, that flicker of uncertainty. Monday is perfect. Premier Realty occupied a corner building downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows that made everything inside visible from the street. I could see Serafina at her desk before we even parked, phone pressed to her ear, laughing at something, completely unaware. Attorney Zoya carried a leather briefcase. I carried nothing but 38 years of documentation and a lifetime of quiet strength that was about to get very, very loud. You ready? Zoya asked. I watched Serafina through the glass. She looked powerful in there, confident, in control. Yes. The bell chimed when we entered. Serafina glanced up, and I watched her expression cycle through confusion, irritation, and finally something that might have been fear. She ended her call immediately. Elora? What are you doing here? We need to talk, I said. You, me, and your colleagues, the same 3 women who toured my house on Saturday. This is my workplace. You can't just. I can, Zoya interrupted, stepping forward. I'm attorney Zoya Petrova, representing Mrs. Elora Varela. We're here to serve you with legal documentation regarding property claims you've made. This can be done privately in a conference room, or publicly at your desk. Your choice. Every head in the office had turned toward us now. I saw Chelsea 2 desks over, her phone frozen halfway to her ear. Monica was standing by the printer, papers forgotten in her hand. Jenna was visible through a glass office door, watching. Fine, Serafina hissed. Conference room. Now. No, I said quietly. Here. With witnesses. Elora, this is insane. Chelsea, Monica, Jenna, I called out, my voice steady and clear. Could you join us, please? This concerns the property assessment you conducted at my home on Saturday. Serafina's face went white. You don't have to. But they were already coming, curious, concerned, professional witnesses to whatever was about to unfold. What's this about? Chelsea asked carefully. Zoya opened her briefcase and pulled out 3 folders, the same 3 I'd brought to her office. She laid them on Serafina's desk with deliberate precision. This is about correcting several false statements made regarding Mrs. Varella's property and financial status, Zoya said. Statements made to you and others in this office. She opened the first folder, the deed, protected in its clear sleeve, official seals visible. This is the grant deed for the property at 847 Sycamore Avenue. Recorded March 14, 1987. You'll note the grantee name, Elora Sofia Varela. Sole owner. Not joint ownership. Not marital property. Sole. Monica leaned in to look. I watched her eyes move across the document. Mrs. Varela built this house with cash from her personal savings earned during her 15-year career as a CPA, Zoya continued. She has paid every property tax bill, every insurance premium, every maintenance cost for 38 years. Matteo Varela, her late husband, never held ownership interest in this property. That's not possible, Serafina said, but her voice had no strength behind it. Matteo told me. Matteo told you what you wanted to hear, I said. Or you heard what you wanted to believe. Zoya opened the second folder, tax records, chronological, my signature on every single one. 38 years of property tax payments, all signed by Elora Varela, all paid from accounts in her name. She looked at Chelsea. On Saturday, you were told Mrs. Varela couldn't afford to maintain this property, that she was a burden on the family, that she was dependent on her late husband's support. Chelsea's professional composure was cracking. That's what we were told, yes. It was a lie, Zoya said simply. She opened the third folder, the trust documents. The Elora and Matteo Family Trust. Established 1995. Current balance, $1,003,247. Trustee, Elora Varela. This trust has been providing monthly financial support to Mrs. Varela's son, Ramiro, for the past 12 years, $3,000 per month, $432,000 total. Serafina made a sound like she'd been struck. That money funded your mortgage, I said, looking directly at her. Your car payments. Your lifestyle. Every vacation you posted on social media. Every designer bag. Every girl's trip to wine country. That was my money, Serafina. Not Matteo's. Mine. I didn't know. Because you never asked. You assumed. Zoya pulled out one final document. The life insurance policy on Matteo Varela. Benefit amount, $150,000. You told multiple people this money was your inheritance. You created an asset inventory list including this amount. She slid a paper across the desk. This is the beneficiary designation. Please read it aloud. Serafina's hands were shaking. Beneficiary, the Elora and Matteo Family Trust. The money was deposited into the trust account last week, Zoya said. It never belonged to you. It was never going to belong to you. Jenna was staring at Serafina with something between shock and disgust. Monica had stepped back, distancing herself. Chelsea was frantically typing notes into her phone. You called me a burden, I said, and my voice finally broke. At my husband's funeral, while I was grieving, you called me worthless. You handed me an eviction notice from my own home. You brought these women to catalog my life as outdated. You tried to erase me. Tears were streaming down Serafina's face now, real tears, not the practiced ones she'd shown at the funeral. Elora, I'm sorry. I didn't know. You made assumptions, I said. About who I was, what I was worth, what I was capable of. You saw a quiet old woman in an outdated cardigan and you decided I was nothing. I was wrong. Serafina looked at me with something I'd never seen from her before, not pity, not dismissal. Respect. I was so wrong. I'm sorry. Please, I'll fix this. I'll move out, I'll stop. You'll do more than that, Zoya said, sliding one final document across the desk. This is a formal cease and desist order. You are prohibited from making any claims on Mrs. Varella's property, finances, or affairs. Any violation will result in immediate legal action. She placed a second document. And this is your 30-day notice. You have exactly as long as you gave her to remove yourself from her business entirely. The office was silent except for Serafina's quiet crying. I'll leave now, she whispered. I'll tell Ramiro everything. I'll fix this. No, I said gently. You'll face the consequences, just like I've been facing them. That's what accountability means, Serafina. I turned to leave, Zoya beside me, and walked past the staring faces of the 3 real estate agents who'd catalogued my home as outdated. Behind me, I heard Serafina collapse into her chair. And I felt nothing but tired, sad relief. The neighborhood grapevine worked faster than I'd expected. Leilani appeared on my doorstep Tuesday afternoon with homemade empanadas and a gleam in her eye that meant she had news. My neighbor for 23 years, she'd witnessed most of my life from across the street, Ramiro learning to ride a bike, Mateo painting the trim every 5 years, the ambulance that took him away for the last time. Tell me it's true, she said, pushing past me into the kitchen. Tell me you really served that woman at her office. Who told you? Chelsea's sister goes to my church. She said Serafina's been a nightmare ever since, losing clients left and right. Nobody wants to work with an agent who publicly demonstrated such poor judgment. I started the kettle for tea. I didn't want her to lose her job. Maybe not. But actions have consequences. Leilani settled into a chair, not Mateo's chair, she'd always been careful about that. She tried to steal your house, Elora. While you were grieving. What did she think would happen? What had she thought would happen? That I'd simply disappear? That quiet meant powerless? The ripple effects came quickly after that. Ramiro called that evening, his voice thick with emotion. Mom, I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know what she was doing. Didn't you? I asked gently. You told me to cooperate, to make it easier. You never once asked what she was asking me to cooperate with. Silence on the other end, heavy, guilty. She told me you were confused, that grief was making you irrational, that we needed to help you transition into something more manageable. And you believed her instead of asking me. I'm so sorry, Mom. I know you are, Mijo. But sorry doesn't undo what happened. It doesn't give me back those weeks of feeling erased in my own home. He was crying now, my soft-hearted boy, caught between the mother who raised him and the wife who'd been spending money that came from me while treating me like garbage. What do I do? He whispered. That's between you and Serafina. Not between you and me. But the marriage was fracturing. I could hear it in the silences, the careful way he phrased things. Serafina had built her life on assumptions that turned out to be lies, and Ramiro was realizing he'd been complicit in those assumptions. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Premier Realty let Serafina go. Not officially for the scene at her desk, they couldn't fire her for that, but her client list had evaporated. Word spread fast in real estate circles: the agent who tried to steal her mother-in-law's house, the agent who didn't even verify ownership before making promises, the agent whose judgment couldn't be trusted. I felt a pang of guilt when Leilani told me. But only a pang. Because Serafina had been perfectly willing to destroy me without a second thought. She came to the house on a Sunday afternoon, 3 weeks after the showdown. I saw her car pull up from the kitchen window, not the luxury sedan she usually drove, but Ramiro's practical Honda. She sat in the driveway for 10 minutes before finally getting out. I opened the door before she could knock. She looked smaller somehow, thinner. Her hair wasn't styled. No makeup. She was holding a cardboard box. "I brought some things back," she said quietly. "Things I packed up. Photos, decorations. Things that belong here." I stepped aside to let her in. She moved through the house like a ghost, returning items to their places: the wedding photo to the mantel, Mateo's reading glasses to the side table, the cross-stitch samplers to the kitchen wall. She worked in silence, and I let her. When she finished, she stood in the living room, holding the empty box. "I lost my job," she said. "I heard. Ramiro's staying with his friend from medical school. We're taking some time." "I'm sorry." "Don't be." She looked at me, really looked at me, and her eyes were red-rimmed but clear. "I deserved all of it. What I did to you was unforgivable. It was cruel. It was worse than cruel. It was ignorant. I spent 12 years in this family, benefiting from your generosity, and I never once wondered who you really were. I just accepted the story I'd told myself, that you were Mateo's dependent widow, that everything came from him, that you were just there." "Background noise," I said softly. "Yes." She set the box down. "My mother told me once that Mateo was the kindest man she'd ever met, that he had this quiet strength that made everyone around him feel safe." I felt tears prick my eyes. "She was wrong," Serafina continued. "He didn't have quiet strength. He learned it. From you." The words hung between us, heavy with meaning. "I thought quiet meant weak," she said. "I thought silence meant you had nothing to say. I was so focused on being loud, being noticed, being in control, that I never saw the power in your stillness. Serafina. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand. Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn. And you earned it 50 times over while I was too blind to see it." She turned to leave, and I let her get all the way to the door before I spoke. "Serafina." She stopped, her hand on the doorknob. "Respect isn't negotiable," I said quietly. "It never was. Not for you to take away, and not for me to beg for. That's the lesson." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand now. I hope you do." After she left, I stood in my living room, in my house, surrounded by 40 years of memories that nobody could take from me, and I felt something I hadn't felt since Mateo died. Peace. Not happiness. The grief was still sharp. But underneath it, something solid. I'd proven that quiet strength doesn't mean silent acceptance of disrespect. And that was enough. After she left, I stood in my living room, in my house, surrounded by 40 years of memories that nobody could take from me, and I felt something I hadn't felt since Mateo died. Peace. Not happiness. The grief was still sharp. But underneath it, something solid. I'd proven that quiet strength doesn't mean silent acceptance of disrespect. And that was enough. But now I need your honest opinion. If your daughter-in-law or son-in-law tried to kick you out of your own home while you were grieving, would you have exposed them publicly like I did? Or would you have handled it privately to protect your child's feelings? Here's the real question. When someone disrespects you publicly, do they deserve private correction or public accountability? Drop your answer in the comments right now.